Caleb Dawson had not believed in ghosts until the afternoon a woman stepped off the Kansas Depot platform and looked straight through him with eyes that still remembered their first kiss. 19 years had passed since that Tennessee creek. 19 years of silence. 19 years of searching for a girl who vanished like smoke in a strong wind. But now she stood 10 feet away, her hand trembling on a carpet bag, her lips forming his name. And on her finger gleamed a ring he had never given her. She had come west as another man's bride. But when their eyes met, Caleb saw something that froze his blood cold. Not joy, not surprise, fear. The kind of fear that comes from being hunted. And behind her, 3 strangers watched with the cold eyes of killers waiting for their prey. What secret was Elena running from? And why did seeing Caleb terrify her more than the men who wanted her dead? This is a story about love that refuses to die, about second chances that must be earned through fire and blood, about the truth that some promises once made can never be broken, no matter how many years or miles try to bury them. If you have ever wondered whether it is too late to fight for what you lost, this story will answer that question. Some loves arrive on time, gentle as spring wind. Others must cross fire and blood, loss and years to find their way home. Both are worth the journey. If this story touches your heart, do me a small favor. Hit that like button so I know you want more stories like this one. Drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. And if you have not already, subscribe to this channel and tap that notification bell. That way, you will never miss a story that might change the way you see love, loss, and the courage it takes to fight for what matters most. Now settle in, because this journey is just beginning. The Kansas heat pressed down like a boot on Caleb Dawson's chest as he stood on the depot platform, watching the afternoon train crawl toward Dusty Creek. Dust devils spun lazy circles across the tracks. The wooden planks beneath his boots creaked with the weight of too many summers. And somewhere behind him, a child laughed at something he could not see. Caleb was 37 years old. His face had been carved by wind and sun into something hard, something that made strangers look away when he met their eyes. Gray streaked through hair that had once been black as coal, and his hands, those killing hands, rested easy at his sides as he waited for his supply shipment. Ammunition, rope, tools for mending fences that did not truly need mending. He had built his ranch 20 miles outside of town, far enough that visitors were rare and questions rarer still. 5 years he had lived in that self-imposed exile, and 5 years he had told himself it was enough. The land was good. The cattle thrived. Pete Morgan, his only hired hand, kept the loneliness at bay with his dry humor and steady presence. It was enough. It had to be enough. The train whistle screamed, and Caleb squinted against the glare as the locomotive shuddered to a stop. Steam hissed, metal groaned. And then the passengers began to descend. 3 men stepped off first. Caleb's spine straightened before his mind caught up. Old instincts, the kind a man never truly buries, surged through him like creek water through a cracked dam. These men moved wrong. Their eyes swept the platform with the cold efficiency of hunters, cataloging faces, measuring threats. One of them, lean and scarred with a face like a blade, let his gaze pass over Caleb without stopping. But Caleb had seen the flicker of recognition, the slight narrowing of those pale eyes. He knows me, Caleb thought, or knows what I used to be. The scarred man murmured something to his companions, and all 3 moved toward the hotel without looking back. Caleb filed this away in the part of his mind that never slept. But his attention was already shifting, drawn by something he could not name toward the 3rd passenger car. A woman descended the iron steps. She wore a traveling dress the color of dust and sage, practical and worn at the hems. Dark hair pinned beneath a modest hat. Sun-darkened skin that spoke of mixed heritage, the kind that drew whispered insults in polite company, and worse in impolite ones. She moved with careful grace, one hand gripping the rail as if the world might tip beneath her feet at any moment. And then she lifted her face toward the brutal sunshine. Caleb's heart stopped. He knew that face. Knew it the way he knew his own reflection in still water. Elena. Elena Vasquez, whose father's farm had bordered his family's land in Tennessee. Elena, who had kissed him by the creek when they were young and stupid and certain that summer would last forever. Elena, who had vanished 19 years ago like smoke in a strong wind, leaving him with nothing but questions and a promise he had never stopped keeping. The name left his mouth before he could stop it. Elena, she heard. Across the noise of the platform, across the distance and the years, she heard him speak her name. She turned. Their eyes met. And Caleb watched fear flood her face like water filling a drowning man's lungs. No. 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 The words were barely a whisper, lost in the chaos of the depot, but Caleb read them on her lips. She stumbled backward, nearly fell, and collided with a man who had been approaching from the far end of the platform. Thomas Brennan. Caleb knew him by reputation only. A widower with 2 daughters and a fondness for whiskey that had consumed everything else. Brennan steadied Elena with hands that trembled slightly, his face confused, already reddened by drink despite the early hour. Elena forced a smile, took his arm, let him lead her toward a waiting wagon. She did not look back. Caleb stood frozen on the platform as the wagon rattled away, his hands shaking for the first time in 5 years. Around him, the depot continued its ordinary chaos. Porters shouted. Trunks thudded against wood. The train wheezed and groaned like an old man settling into sleep. But Caleb heard none of it. Why was she afraid? Not surprised, not confused, afraid. The kind of fear that lived in the bones that came from running so long a person forgot what standing still felt like. The 3 strangers had paused near the hotel entrance. The scarred one, their leader, watched Elena's wagon disappear around a corner. "She has changed," the man said to his companions. "But that is her. We wait." Caleb's blood went cold. Whatever Elena was running from, it had followed her here. And now she was riding toward a homestead 5 miles outside of town with a drunk who could not protect a barn cat, let alone a woman with hunters on her trail. He should walk away. Whatever trouble she had found, it was not his concern. He had built a life on the ashes of his old one, and that life did not include risking everything for a ghost from Tennessee. But his feet were already moving toward his horse. Some promises, it seemed, could not be buried, not even under 5 years of silence and 20 miles of Kansas dirt. The ride to Brennan's place would take less than an hour. Caleb had until then to decide what he would say when he got there. He suspected the truth would be simpler and far more dangerous than anything he could plan. 19 years. 19 years since he had watched her walk away from that creek, her lips still warm against his memory. 19 years of searching, of wondering, of building walls high enough to forget. And now she had stepped off a train and looked at him like he was death itself come calling. Caleb mounted his horse and turned toward the Brennan homestead. Behind him, the scarred man watched and smiled. The Dawson Ranch appeared at dusk, solid and silent against the darkening sky. Caleb did not go inside. He left his horse at the rail and walked to the porch, where Pete Morgan sat whittling something that might have been a duck or might have been kindling. Pete was 55 years old, weathered by decades of trail driving, and branded by a grief he never discussed. His wife and children had died in a Comanche raid 20 years past. He understood loss in a way that required no explanation. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Pete said without looking up. "I did." Pete's knife stilled. He waited. "Woman I loved when I was barely a man." Caleb leaned against the porch rail, facing the darkness rather than his friend. Thought she was dead or gone forever. She stepped off that train today, getting married to Thomas Brennan. That drunk with the 2 girls? Pete whistled low. "Hell of a downgrade from you, boss." She looked at me like I was the last person she wanted to see, like I was dangerous to her. Maybe you remind her of something painful." Caleb shook his head. It was more than that. It was fear, the kind that comes from being hunted. Pete set down his whittling. His eyes, sharp despite his years, studied Caleb's profile. "Those three strangers," Caleb continued, "the ones who got off the train before her. Hard men, watching the crowd like wolves watching sheep. You think they are after her? I think they are the reason she ran all the way to Kansas to marry a man she has never met." Silence stretched between them. Somewhere in the barn, a horse stamped and snorted. "What are you going to do?" Pete finally asked. Pete finally. "I do not know yet." Caleb pushed off the rail and headed for the door. "First, I need to find out what I'm dealing with." That night, Caleb could not sleep. He paced his cabin, thoughts circling like buzzards over something dead. Finally, for the first time in 5 years, he pulled the locked box from under his bed. The hinges creaked. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay a Colt Peacemaker. He did not touch it, just stared at the notches carved into the grip. 14 of them. One for each man he had killed during his years as a bounty hunter. They had called him the Shadow back then. He brought in more wanted men dead than alive, because dead men did not run, and dead men did not shoot back. He had been good at killing. Too good. Until the day he shot a 14-year-old boy. The kid had drawn on him. Instinct had taken over. By the time Caleb realized how young he was, the bullet had already punched through the boy's chest. That was when Caleb had walked away. Sold his guns. Bought land in Kansas. Started building something instead of destroying it. But the Colt remained, hidden but not forgotten. Like so many other things. He closed the box without touching the weapon and returned it to its place beneath the bed. Tomorrow, he would ride to the Brennan homestead. He would find out why Elena was afraid. And then, God help him, he would decide whether the shadow needed to rise again. Pete returned from town the next afternoon with gossip and a grim expression. "Thomas Brennan owes money," he reported. "Gambling debts to someone back east. Nobody knows who, but the amounts are ugly. And the strangers? Rented rooms at the hotel, paying cash. Asking around about a Mexican woman who arrived recently." Caleb's jaw tightened. "They are not even hiding it. Why would they?" Pete shrugged. "Who's going to stop them out here? Sheriff Garrett is honest, but old. Town has maybe 30 able-bodied men, and half of them would not know which end of a rifle to point at trouble. He was right. Dusty Creek was too small to matter and too far from anywhere to get help. If those men wanted Elena dead, they could make it happen and be gone before anyone thought to raise an alarm. Unless someone got in their way." Caleb grabbed his hat. "Where are you headed?" Pete called after him. "Just being neighborly." Pete's snort followed him out the door. Both of them knew it was the most dangerous kind of lie. The Brennan homestead told its own sad story. Fences sagging, chickens too thin to lay, weeds strangling what remained of the garden. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges, and the whole place smelled of neglect and whiskey fumes. Thomas Brennan himself was passed out on the porch, an empty bottle cradled in his arms like a sleeping child. His daughters, 2 girls of maybe 12 and 9, watched Caleb's approach from the yard. The older one was trying to repair a fence post by herself. Her hands were raw and her face was hard in a way no child's face should be. The younger one sat in the dirt, clutching a rag doll and staring at nothing. Then the door opened and Elena emerged. She saw Caleb, went white as bone. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she was walking toward him, fast and purposeful, pulling him away from the house with desperate strength. "You cannot be here," she hissed. "You have to leave, now." 19 years, Elena. Caleb's voice was steady, though nothing inside him felt steady at all. 19 years I have wondered what happened to you. You owe me something, even if it is just the truth. The truth will get you killed. Then it will be my choice to make." She stared at him, and he saw it then. The exhaustion, the fear. the weight of running for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to stand still. "There are men looking for me," she whispered. "Dangerous men. If they see you with me, if they think you matter to me, they will kill you just to hurt me. Please, Caleb, if you ever cared about me at all, stay away." The words should have stopped him, should have sent him riding back to his safe, quiet ranch where no one asked questions and no one expected anything. Instead, he looked into her eyes, and he saw the girl who had kissed him by the creek all those years ago, the girl who had made him promise to wait. He had kept that promise for 19 years. He was not going to break it now. "I am not leaving," he said. "Not until I know you are safe." Her eyes filled with tears. But before she could respond, a small voice interrupted them. "Mama Elena?" The older girl, Ruth, had approached without either of them noticing. Her face was suspicious, guarded, but there was something like hope flickering in her eyes. "Papa got letters," she said, "from Chicago. He hides them under the floorboards." "I saw." Elena's expression changed. Something cold and terrible settled over her features. "Wait here," she told Caleb. She went inside. Through the thin walls, Caleb heard raised voices. Thomas's slurred denials, Elena's sharp questions, then silence. When Elena returned, her face was ashen, but her voice was steady. "He was paid to bring me here. He did not know why, but he was paid. They are coming for me, Caleb, and he led them right to me." The words hung in the summer air like smoke from a distant fire. Caleb looked at the sagging homestead, at the drunk on the porch, at the two thin girls watching with eyes too old for their faces. "Who is hunting you?" he asked. "I need a name." Elena was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice was hollow as an empty grave. "Silas Croft, Chicago. He is the devil wearing a gentleman's suit." She met his eyes. "And I am the only one who can put him in the ground." On the ridge above the homestead, Victor Crane lowered his spyglass and smiled. "Complication," he told his men. "She has got protection now." He watched the cowboy mount his horse and ride away, memorizing the set of his shoulders, the way he sat in the saddle. "We adjust the plan." The hunt, it seemed, had just become interesting. That night, Caleb sat alone in his cabin and remembered. Tennessee. 19 years ago. Summer heat and creek water, and a girl with hair like midnight, and a laugh that made everything else seem quiet. They were young then. He was 18, she was 16, and the whole world felt like a promise waiting to be kept. Her father's farm bordered his family's land, and they had grown up in each other's shadows. Never quite friends until the summer, everything changed. He remembered the first time she looked at him different. They were standing in the shallows of the creek that cut through both their properties, water swirling around their ankles, and she had said something that made him laugh. When he looked up, she was watching him with an expression he had never seen before. Something soft and hungry all at once. She kissed him that evening, rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his while the sun bled red across the horizon. "Promise me," she whispered against his mouth. "Promise we will have a life together. I promise." He had meant it with everything he was. That night, gunshots shattered the darkness. By morning, Elena's father was dead. A robbery, people said. Random violence in a world full of it. Elena and her remaining family vanished before dawn. No note, no explanation, no goodbye. Caleb searched for 2 years, spent every penny he had chasing rumors and dead ends. Finally, broke and desperate, he had taken up bounty hunting. The money was good and it kept him moving, kept him looking. He found her once, 10 years ago, Chicago. He had tracked a lead to a modest house on a tree-lined street. Through the window, he saw her. Older now, thinner but unmistakably Elena. She was laughing at something a man beside her had said. A husband, judging by the ring on her finger. She looked happy. Caleb stood on that street for an hour, watching. Then he turned and walked away. She had moved on, built a new life. He had no right to tear it apart with his presence, but the question had never stopped haunting him. What if he had knocked on that door? What if he had spoken to her, told her he was still there, still waiting? Would the last 10 years have been different? He would never know. And now she was here in Kansas, running from something terrible enough to drive her into a dead man's arms. Caleb looked at the locked box under his bed. The Colt Peacemaker lay inside, cold and patient. 14 notches on the grip, 14 lives ended by his hand. He had sworn never to add another. But some promises, it seemed, were easier to make than to keep. Morning came gray and heavy with the threat of rain. Caleb found Pete in the barn, mending tack that did not need mending. "Going to town," Caleb said. Pete did not look up. "Want company?" "No, but keep your eyes open. Something is coming. I can feel it." Pete's hands stilled. Then he nodded once and went back to his work. Caleb rode toward Dusty Creek with the wind at his back and dread coiling in his gut. The Lucky Strike saloon was nearly empty at this hour, a few old-timers nursing morning whiskey, a card game in the corner that had been going since yesterday, and 3 strangers at a table near the back. Caleb took a seat at the bar where he could watch them without being obvious about it. The bartender, a thick-armed man named Dutch, poured him coffee without being asked. "Rough night?" Dutch asked. "Something like that." The strangers were talking low, their heads bent together. The scarred one, their leader, had a voice that carried just enough for Caleb to catch fragments. "The Shadow. Manhunter. Brought in more dead than alive." Caleb's blood went cold. They were talking about him. Old Morrison had told them. The banker who remembered too much and talked too freely. Morrison had been in town when Caleb first arrived, before the Shadow became Caleb Dawson, quiet rancher. The scarred man, Victor Crane, if the whispers were true, looked up and met Caleb's eyes across the room. He smiled. Caleb held the gaze until Crane looked away. But the message had been delivered. They knew who he was, what he had been, and they were not afraid. Caleb found Morrison in his office at the bank, counting coins with the methodical satisfaction of a man who loved money more than people. Morrison. Caleb closed the door behind him. "We need to talk." Dawson. The banker's smile was nervous. "Something I can help you with? Those strangers asking questions about me? What did you tell them?" Morrison's smile faltered. "Just that you keep to yourself. That you rode as a manhunter years back. Nothing harmful, nothing harmful." Caleb leaned forward, and something in his expression made Morrison shrink back. "You told hired killers that I used to hunt men for money. Did it occur to you they might be hunting someone themselves?" "I did not know." Morrison's voice had gone high and thin. "They said they were looking for a runaway wife, that her husband wanted her back. And you believed them. Why would I not?" Caleb straightened. "Because men like that do not bring wives home. They bury them." He left Morrison sputtering and pale, and rode for the Brennan homestead as fast as his horse could carry him. Elena was waiting on the porch when he arrived. The girls were inside. He could hear them moving through the thin walls, and Thomas was nowhere to be seen. "We need to talk," Caleb said. "I know." Elena's voice was steady, but her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "Come inside." The homestead was as sad within as without. Bare walls, sparse furniture, the smell of old whiskey and older grief. Elena led him to a rough-hewn table and sat across from him. "After my father died," she began without preamble, "I was sent to live with relatives in Chicago. They sold me to a household as a servant. I was 16 years old. Caleb's hands curled into fists beneath the table. The man who bought me was named Silas Croft, rich, powerful, connected to politicians and police alike. I worked in his house for 8 years, invisible, silent, surviving." She paused, drew a breath. "One night I heard screaming. I went to see what had happened. I found Silas in his study with his hands around his wife's throat. Caleb closed his eyes. He saw me watching. Our eyes met, and then she stopped struggling. Elena's voice had gone flat, distant, like she was describing something that had happened to someone else. I ran, changed my name, moved from city to city, but his men always found me. 3 years I have been running. The mail-order bride scheme was my last chance. I thought if I disappeared into the frontier, married some stranger, became someone new, maybe he would finally stop looking. But he did not stop. No, Elena's laugh was bitter as ash. He never stops. And now he knows exactly where I am. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question that had been burning in his chest since the depot. Your father's death. Was it really a robbery? Elena flinched. For a long time I thought so, but when I was working in Silas's house, I saw a man. Scarred face, cold eyes. I recognized him. The one on the train? Yes. Victor Crane. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. He was the one who pulled the trigger that night in Tennessee. I saw his face in the lamplight for just a moment before he rode away. I did not understand then. I was just a child. But now, I know. Know what? That my father saw something he should not have. Something connected to Silas's smuggling operation. And Silas had him killed for it. Caleb felt the world tilt beneath him. 19 years. Elena had been running from this man for 19 years. And Silas had been controlling her life even longer than that. Why did they send you to his household? Caleb asked. After your father died? Elena's smile was the saddest thing he had ever seen. Because Silas wanted me where he could watch me. I was a loose end, a little girl who might remember too much when she grew up. Better to keep me close, keep me silent, keep me useful. Caleb stood, crossed to the window, looked out at the dying homestead and the Kansas sky beyond. He wants to kill you. Yes, and those men on the train are here to do it. Yes. Caleb turned to face her. Then we need to stop them first. Elena shook her head. You do not understand. Silas Croft is not just some criminal. He has money, power, connections that reach all the way to the governor's office. If you fight him, he will destroy you. Caleb thought of the Colt peacemaker under his bed, the 14 notches on its grip. Let him try, he said. And for the first time since the depot, something like hope flickered in Elena's eyes. Thomas Brennan woke to shame. It came slowly at first, seeping through the fog of drink like water through cracked earth. His head pounded, his mouth tasted of copper and regret. And somewhere beyond the throbbing in his skull, he could hear voices. Elena. And a man. Thomas rolled onto his side and squinted through the window. His vision swam, but he could make out the cowboy from the depot. The one Elena had looked at like she was seeing a ghost. They were talking low and urgent, their heads bent together with an intimacy that made something cold twist in Thomas's gut. He should have known. Should have known a woman like Elena would never have truly chosen him. He was a drunk, a failure, a man who had sold his daughter's only chance at a real mother for a fistful of money and the promise of cleared debts. The letters burned in his memory. 3 months ago, a man had approached him in the Lucky Strike, well-dressed, polite, said he was looking for a runaway wife, said her husband in Chicago wanted her home safe, said there was money in it for Thomas if he would write some letters, pretend to be a lonely widower seeking companionship. Thomas had not asked questions. He had needed the money too badly for questions. But now Elena was here, and those men were watching her with eyes like hungry wolves, and Thomas understood with sickening clarity that he had not helped reunite a wayward wife with her loving husband. He had lured a lamb to slaughter. Thomas pushed himself upright and vomited into the dirt. Inside the house, Caleb was making plans. We cannot stay here, he said. This place is too exposed. Anyone could ride up from any direction. Then where? Elena asked. My ranch. It is 20 miles out. Rough terrain between here and there, easier to defend. And the girls? They come with us. Elena hesitated. Thomas? is a drunk and a coward who sold you for gambling money." Caleb's voice was harsh, but his eyes were not unkind. "But he is also their father. And right now those men want you, not him. If we leave, they might leave him alone, or they might kill him to send a message. Maybe. But if they do, it will not be your fault. It will be his." Elena looked toward the window where she could see Ruth and Sarah playing some listless game in the dust. "Those girls have already lost their mother," she said quietly. "I will not let them lose their father, too." Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Then we convince him to come with us." Thomas was sitting on the porch steps when they emerged, his head in his hands, his body shaking with something that might have been withdrawal or might have been fear. Elena crouched beside him. "Thomas, go away." His voice was muffled. "I know what I did. I know what I am. Do you know what is going to happen if you stay here?" Thomas lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. "They will kill me." "Yes." Elena's voice was gentle despite the words. "They will kill you, and then they will take your daughters, and no one will ever know what happened to any of you." Thomas looked at his girls. Something in his face cracked. "I just wanted the debts to go away," he whispered. "I just wanted to stop being afraid of every knock on the door." "I know." Elena took his hand. "We have all done things we are not proud of. But right now, you have a choice. You can stay here and die, or you can come with us and try to live. For Ruth, for Sarah, for the man you might still become." Thomas stared at her like she was speaking a language he had forgotten. "Why?" he asked. "Why are you being kind to me after what I did?" "Because someone was kind to me once, when I did not deserve it." She glanced at Caleb. "And because your daughters already love you, even when you make it hard." Thomas was silent for a long time, then slowly he nodded. "All right," he said. "All right. I will come." They left the homestead an hour later. Caleb rode ahead, rifle across his saddle, eyes scanning the horizon for trouble. Elena drove the Brennan wagon with the girls huddled in the back, clutching what few possessions they had been able to gather. Thomas sat beside her, pale and sweating, but sober for perhaps the first time in months. The ride to the Dawson ranch was tense and silent. Caleb kept expecting riders to appear on the ridgeline, kept waiting for the crack of a rifle shot. But the land remained empty, the sky remained vast, and slowly the miles passed beneath them. Pete met them at the gate with a shotgun and raised eyebrows. "Company," Caleb said. "I can see that." Pete looked at Elena, at the girls, at Thomas swaying on the wagon seat. "Trouble? The worst kind." Pete nodded and stepped aside. "Then you had better come in." The Dawson ranch was modest but solid. A cabin with thick walls and good sight lines. A barn that could shelter both horses and defenders. A well that meant they would not have to leave for water. Caleb had built it to last. Now he wondered if it would have to withstand a siege. He settled the Brennans in the spare room, gave Ruth and Sarah blankets and what food he had on hand, and left Thomas with strict instructions to stay sober or get out. Then he found Elena on the porch, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "This is a good place," she said without turning. "Strong. It has to be. Is that why you chose it? Because it was defensible?" Caleb moved to stand beside her. "I chose it because it was far from everywhere. Because I thought if I put enough miles between me and what I used to be, maybe I could become someone else." Did it work? He thought of the Colt peacemaker, the 14 notches, the boy's face that still haunted his dreams. "No," he said, "but it gave me time. Time to figure out who I wanted to be. And who is that?" Caleb looked at her. The fading light caught the silver in her hair, the lines that time and hardship had carved around her eyes. "Someone who protects instead of destroys," he said. "Someone who builds instead of breaks." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. "I used to dream about you," she said. "After they took me to Chicago. I would dream about the creek and the summer, and the way you looked at me like I was the only person in the world. You were. You still are." Her fingers tightened on his. I thought you had forgotten me. When the years passed and you never came, I came. Caleb's voice was rough. I came to Chicago 10 years ago. 10. I saw you through a window. You were married. Laughing. I thought you were happy. Happy? Elena's laugh was hollow. Robert was a gambler and a coward. He abandoned me 6 months later. If you had knocked on that door, I know. Caleb's jaw tightened. I have thought about it every day since. They stood in silence as the last light bled from the sky. Then Elena turned to face him fully. We cannot change what happened, she said, but we can choose what happens next. And what do you choose? She looked at him with eyes that held 19 years of waiting. You, she said. I choose you, like I should have chosen you from the beginning. Caleb pulled her close. She fit against him like she had always belonged there, her head tucked beneath his chin, her hands fisted in his shirt. Whatever comes next, he said against her hair, we face it together. Together, she agreed. And in that moment, Caleb Dawson made a choice. He would not run, would not hide, would not let the men who had stolen Elena's life take anything more from her. If Silas Croft wanted a war, he would get one, and the shadow would rise again. In town, Victor Crane received news of the Brennans' departure with something approaching admiration. He moved fast, he said, got them out before we could close the trap. His men shifted uneasily. What do we do now? We wait. Victor lit a thin cigar and watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling. He has taken her to his ranch. Good ground for defense. We cannot take it with 3 men. So we send for more? No. Victor smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. We send for Silas himself. He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkening Kansas sky. This is no longer just about the woman. The shadow is involved now, a former manhunter protecting the only witness to murder. Victor's smile widened. Silas will want to handle this personally. And when he arrives, we burn this whole territory to the ground. That night, while Elena slept and the girls dreamed fitful dreams, Caleb sat alone in the barn and pulled the locked box from his saddlebag. He opened it. The Colt Peacemaker gleamed in the lamplight. 14 notches. 14 ghosts. He had sworn never to add another. But some oaths, he understood now, were meant to be broken. He lifted the weapon, checked the action, loaded the chambers with steady hands. Tomorrow the waiting would end. Tomorrow the shadow would return, and God help anyone who got in his way. 3 days passed in tense preparation. Caleb fortified the ranch as best he could. He moved supplies to defensible positions, set up fields of fire from the windows, showed Ruth where to hide if shooting started, and though the girl was only 12, she listened with a gravity that made his heart ache. Teach me to shoot, she said on the 2nd day. Caleb looked at Elena, who nodded once. If they get past us, Ruth continued, I want to be able to protect Sarah. So Caleb taught her. Not to fight, there was no time for that, but to defend, to load, to aim, to pull the trigger when her life depended on it. She learned fast, too fast for a child. War aged everyone, Caleb thought, even the innocent. Thomas Brennan surprised them all. Without whiskey to blur his edges, he was a different man. Quieter, sadder, but useful. He fixed fences that needed fixing, hauled water without being asked, looked at his daughters with a bewildered love, as if seeing them clearly for the first time in years. On the 3rd night, he found Caleb on the porch. I need to tell you something, Thomas said. Caleb waited. The man who paid me. The one who arranged for Elena to come here. He gave me letters, instructions. I hid them under the floorboards at the homestead. I know. Ruth told us. Thomas flinched. Of course she did. She always was too smart for her own good. Is there anything else? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a creased photograph. This came with the last letter. Thomas handed it over. I do not know who he is, but the writing on the back. Caleb turned the photograph over. A man with a scarred face stared back at him. Cold eyes. blade-sharp features. On the back, in elegant script, "My faithful associate." "S.C. Victor Crane," Caleb said. "That is his name?" "Yes. He is the one leading the hunters." Thomas swallowed hard. "There is something else. Something Elena needs to see." They gathered in the cabin, Elena, Caleb, Pete, and Thomas. The girls had been sent to bed with strict instructions to stay there. Thomas spread papers across the table, letters, records, a ledger page covered in careful handwriting. "I did not understand most of it," he admitted, "but this—" He pointed to a passage in one of the letters. "This I understood." Elena leaned closer. "Read the words aloud. The Vasquez situation from Tennessee is resolved. The girl has been placed in the Chicago household as discussed. She knows nothing. Keep it that way." Her voice faded to silence. Caleb watched her face. Watched the color drain from it. Watched understanding dawn like a terrible sunrise. "He knew," she whispered. "Silas knew about me before I ever came to Chicago. Before my father was even dead." "He arranged it," Thomas said quietly. "All of it. The robbery. Your father's murder. You being sent to his household. It was all planned." Elena's hands were shaking. 19 years. 19 years he has controlled my life, killed my father, sold me into servitude, watched me run like a mouse in a maze he built himself. She looked up, and her eyes were no longer afraid. They were furious. "When he comes," she said, "I want to be the one who ends him." Victor Crane arrived at the ranch gate the next morning. He came alone, hands visible, a white handkerchief tied to his rifle barrel. Caleb met him with the Colt drawn and steady. "That is close enough." Victor reined in his horse. His scarred face was calm, almost amused. "I am not here to fight, Dawson, just to talk." "Then talk." "Silas Croft left Chicago 4 days ago. He will be here within the week. 20 men ride with him." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to know what is coming." Victor's smile was thin as a razor. "And because I want you to understand that when the time comes, there will be no negotiation, no surrender. He means to burn this town to the ground and salt the earth where it stood." Caleb's grip tightened on the Colt. "Why does he care so much? One witness to a murder he committed years ago?" Victor's smile faded. "Because Elena is not just a witness. She is proof. Proof that Silas has been eliminating problems for decades. Her father, his wife, a dozen others between." Victor shook his head slowly. "If she lives to testify, his empire crumbles. So he will do whatever it takes to ensure she does not live." "And you?" Caleb asked. "What do you get out of this?" Victor was quiet for a long moment. "I get to watch," he said finally, "to see if the shadow is everything they say he was." He turned his horse and rode away without looking back. Elena found Caleb in the barn that afternoon. He was cleaning his weapons with the meticulous care of a man preparing for war. 3 rifles, 2 pistols, the Colt Peacemaker. 20 men, Elena said. "I heard. We cannot win against those odds." "Maybe not." Caleb did not look up from his work. "But we can make them pay for every inch of ground." Elena sat down across from him. "There has to be another way. If there is, I do not see it." Caleb finally met her eyes. "Sheriff Garrett is old and outnumbered. The townspeople are farmers, not fighters, and even if we ran, Silas would follow. He will always follow. Then what do we do?" Caleb set down the rifle he had been cleaning. "We find allies. Anyone with a reason to want Silas dead. Anyone who might fight beside us when the time comes." "Where do we find people like that?" Caleb thought of Victor Crane, of the cold calculation behind his scarred face, of the way he had delivered his warning like a man with his own agenda. "I have an idea," he said, "but you are not going to like it." That night, Caleb rode to town alone. He found Victor Crane in the Lucky Strike, drinking whiskey with the unhurried patience of a man who had nowhere else to be. Shadow. Victor raised his glass. Come to negotiate? Caleb sat across from him. You hate Silas Croft. Victor's expression did not change. What makes you say that? The way you looked at Elena when you delivered your warning. Not like a hunter looks at prey, like a man looks at a mirror. Victor was silent. He took something from you, Caleb continued, someone, and you have been waiting for the right moment to make him pay. Victor's hand tightened on his glass. My sister, he said finally, she worked for him. Bookkeeper. Found records that could have destroyed him. He had her killed, made it look like she took her own life. Caleb nodded slowly. Help us, he said. Help us take him down, and you get your revenge. Victor laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. 4 against 20? Those are poor odds, Shadow. Better than 1 against 20. Victor studied him for a long moment. You are willing to trust me? After everything? No. But I am willing to use you. Just like you are willing to use us. Something flickered in Victor's eyes. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. All right, he said. I will help you. But understand this. When Silas dies, I want to be the one looking into his eyes. If you earn it, you can have it. Victor smiled his razor smile and raised his glass. To strange alliances. To victory, Caleb said, or death. They drank. The attack came 3 days later, not from Silas himself. He was still a day out, according to Victor's intelligence. But his advance riders had arrived, and they struck without warning. It was Pete who raised the alarm. A rifle shot cracking the dawn silence, followed by his voice bellowing from the barn. Riders coming in, 6 of them. From the south. Caleb grabbed the Colt and sprinted for the door. Elena was already there, rifle in hand, her face pale but determined. Get the girls to the cellar, Caleb told her. Thomas, go with them. Thomas hesitated. I can fight. You can die. Caleb's voice was hard. Your daughters need you alive. Go. Thomas went. Caleb took position at the front window. Pete was already firing from the barn, his shots measured and precise. Victor had vanished into the rocks above the ranch, doing whatever it was that sharpshooters did. The riders came fast, firing as they rode, bullets splintering wood and kicking up dust. Caleb sighted, fired. A rider tumbled from his saddle. Pete dropped another. Victor's rifle cracked from somewhere above, and a third man went down. The remaining 3 wheeled their horses and fled. It was over in less than 2 minutes. They found the wounded rider where he had fallen. He was young, barely 20, with the desperate eyes of a man who knew he was dying. Please, he gasped, help me. Caleb crouched beside him. Tell me about Silas Croft. How many men? When does he arrive? The young man coughed blood. 20 when he left Chicago. But more joined on the road. 30 now, maybe more. He arrives tomorrow. Tomorrow. Caleb felt the word like a weight settling onto his shoulders. Why? He asked. Why does he want her so badly? Because she saw, the young man whispered. She saw him kill his wife, and she is the only one left who can prove it. Everyone else who knew, he killed them all. His eyes lost focus. His breathing stopped. Caleb stood slowly. 30 men, Pete said from behind him. At least. We cannot hold the ranch against those numbers. No. Caleb looked toward the rocky hills beyond his property. But we do not have to hold the ranch. He turned to find Victor approaching from the ridgeline. There are caves in those hills, Caleb said. Defensible, limited approaches. I know them, Victor confirmed. Silas's men would have to come single file through the canyon to reach them. Then that is where we make our stand. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Elena gathered supplies while Caleb and Pete rigged what traps they could. Victor scouted the canyon, marking positions, calculating angles. Thomas, to his credit, worked without complaint. He carried, he lifted, he did whatever was asked. But it was Ruth who surprised everyone. "I found something," she said that evening, "in the caves." Caleb looked up from the rifle he was loading. "A back way out," Ruth continued. "Through the rocks. Sarah found it, actually. She was exploring while we were setting up camp." Caleb exchanged a glance with Elena. "Show me," he said. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for an adult to squeeze through. It emerged on the far side of the hills, hidden behind a tumble of boulders. "If things go badly," Caleb said, "this is how you get the girls out." Elena nodded. "But I am not running." "I know." He took her hand. "Just promise me that if the fight is lost, you will take them and go. Give them a chance." Elena's jaw tightened. "I promise," she said finally. "But it will not come to that." Caleb wished he could share her certainty. That night they gathered in the cave that would serve as their fortress. 4 adults, 2 children, against 30 killers led by a man who had spent 19 years making sure his secrets stayed buried. The odds were impossible. But Caleb had faced impossible odds before. And he had Elena beside him now, and Ruth and Sarah counting on them, and even Thomas Brennan finding something like courage in the ruins of his broken life. Tomorrow, Silas Croft would come, and the shadow would be waiting. Dawn came blood-red over the Kansas hills. Caleb stood at the canyon entrance and watched the light spread across the land like fire across dry grass. Somewhere beyond those rolling plains, Silas Croft was approaching with his army of killers. 30 men, maybe more, against 4 defenders and 2 children hiding in caves. Caleb had known worse odds, had survived situations that should have killed him 10 times over, but he had never had so much to lose. Elena found him there, her rifle slung across her back, her face set in lines of grim determination. "They will be here soon," she said. "I know." "Caleb." He turned to face her. "Whatever happens today," she said, "I need you to know. These past few days, being with you, it has been the happiest I have felt in 19 years. This is not goodbye. I know." She reached up and touched his face, just in case. He pulled her close and kissed her, deep and desperate and full of everything they had never had the chance to say. When they broke apart, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Kill them all," she whispered. "Every last one." Victor Crane was already in position when Caleb returned to the caves. The scarred gunman had found himself a perch on a ledge overlooking the canyon approach, where he could see anyone coming from half a mile away. 32 riders, he reported without looking down. I counted. "Any sign of Croft?" "Third horse from the front, well-dressed, riding like a man who has never had to worry about danger in his life. That is about to change." Victor's laugh was cold. "Yes, it is." Pete had the cave entrance fortified as well as possible. Rocks piled for cover. Rifles loaded and ready. A clear field of fire that would turn the narrow canyon into a killing ground. Thomas Brennan stood beside him, pale but steady. "You do not have to do this," Caleb said. Thomas shook his head. "Yes, I do. This is my fault, all of it. If I had not sold her to those men, none of this would be happening. That does not mean you have to die for it." Thomas looked at him with haunted eyes. "I was a coward my whole life, Dawson. Let me be brave just once." Caleb clasped his shoulder and said nothing. Some things did not need words. Ruth and Sarah were hidden in the deepest part of the cave, near the narrow passage that would serve as their escape route if everything went wrong. Elena crouched beside them, checking their supplies one last time. Water, food, a small knife for Ruth. "If we tell you to run," Elena said, "you run. You do not look back. You do not stop. You follow the passage to the other side, and you keep going until you find help." Ruth's jaw tightened. "I want to fight. I know, sweetheart. But Sarah needs you." She cannot make it alone. Ruth looked at her sister, who was clutching her rag doll with white-knuckled fingers. "Promise me you will come back," Ruth said. Elena's heart broke. "I promise," she lied. They came at mid-morning. The sound reached them first, hoofbeats like distant thunder, voices carrying on the wind. Then the first riders appeared at the mouth of the canyon. Caleb watched through his rifle sight as they approached. Hard men on hard horses, bristling with weapons. They moved with the confidence of those who had never lost a fight. That confidence was about to be tested. The lead riders reached a spot Caleb had marked the night before. A narrow point where the canyon walls pressed close, leaving only enough room for 2 horses abreast. "Now," he breathed. Victor's rifle cracked from above. The lead rider pitched from his saddle. All hell broke loose. The canyon became a slaughterhouse. Victor picked off targets from his elevated position with methodical precision. Pete's shotgun roared, cutting down anyone who got too close. Thomas fired with more enthusiasm than accuracy, but in the confined space, even wild shots found their marks. Caleb moved through the chaos like a ghost. The Colt Peacemaker sang its deadly song, each shot finding its target with the terrible precision of a man who had spent years perfecting his craft. The shadow had returned. Silas's men fell back, regrouped, charged again. Bodies piled at the canyon entrance. Horses screamed, men cursed and bled and died. But there were too many of them. For every one that fell, 2 more pressed forward. Slowly, inexorably, they pushed deeper into the canyon. Caleb took a bullet in the shoulder. It felt like a red-hot poker punching through flesh, and for a moment, the world went white. Then Elena was there, dragging him behind cover, pressing a cloth against the wound. "How bad?" "It will not kill me." Caleb's voice was tight with pain. "But I am going to be useless with a rifle. Then use the pistol." He managed a grim smile. "Yes, ma'am." Pete went down next. A rifle round caught him in the side, spinning him around and dropping him behind a boulder. Caleb crawled to him through a hail of bullets. "Pete. Pete, talk to me. Just a scratch, boss." Pete's voice was weak, but his eyes were still fierce. Had worse from an angry bull back in '72. "Can you still shoot?" Pete picked up his rifle with shaking hands. "Until I cannot." They had killed maybe 15 of Silas's men, but that still left nearly 20. And the defenders were running low on ammunition, low on strength, low on time. Victor's rifle had gone silent. Caleb did not know if the sharpshooter was dead, wounded, or simply out of bullets. Thomas crouched behind a rock, reloading with trembling fingers. "We cannot hold," he said. "I know. What do we do?" Caleb looked toward the cave where the girls were hidden, where Elena was supposed to be guarding them. She was not there. He spun around, searching desperately, and found her moving toward the canyon entrance with a rifle in her hands. "Elena, what are you doing?" She did not answer, just kept walking. Silas Croft had dismounted. He stood at the rear of his men, well protected, watching the battle with cold satisfaction. His suit was immaculate. His hands were clean. He had not fired a single shot himself. That was about to change. Elena stepped into the open. Every rifle swung toward her, every finger tightened on triggers. But no one fired, because Silas Croft raised his hand and stopped them. "Miss Vasquez," he called out. "At last!" Elena walked forward. Slow, steady, her rifle held low but ready. "Silas, you look older, and you look desperate." Silas smiled, surrounded by dead men and lost causes. "Is this really how you want your story to end?" "My story is not over yet." "Oh, but it is." Silas gestured at the carnage around them. "Your friends are dying, your protectors are failing, and you are standing before me with nothing but a rifle and your ridiculous pride. I have one thing you do not." "What is that?" "The truth." Silas's smile flickered. "I know what you did," Elena continued. "To my father, to your wife, to everyone who ever threatened your precious empire. I have proof. You have nothing. I have letters, records, a photograph of Victor Crane with your signature on the back. Enough to see you hang." Silas's face went cold. "Ah, so the snake finally showed his colors. I wondered when he would betray me. He betrayed you because you killed his sister, just like you kill everyone who gets close to your secrets. And you think any court in this country will take the word of a Mexican servant over mine?" "Maybe not." Elena raised her rifle. "But a bullet does not care about courtrooms." The air went still. Every gun was pointed at Elena now. She was going to die. They all knew it. But she did not flinch. The shot came from above. Not at Elena. At the man beside Silas. His bodyguard pitched forward with a hole in his forehead. Victor Crane was not dead after all. Chaos erupted. Elena fired at Silas but missed as he dove for cover. Caleb burst from concealment, Colt blazing, cutting down two more of Silas's men before they could react. Pete and Thomas opened fire from behind their barricade. Victor's rifle cracked again and again from his hidden position. The battle had turned. Silas Croft ran. The man who had orchestrated 19 years of suffering, who had killed and controlled and corrupted with impunity, fled like a coward toward the mouth of the canyon. Elena saw him. She sprinted after him, ignoring the bullets, ignoring the danger, driven by a fury that had been building for 2 decades. "Elena." Caleb's voice was distant, lost in the roar of combat. "Elena, no." But she was already gone. She caught him at the canyon entrance. Silas had lost his horse, lost his men, lost everything except the derringer he pulled from his coat as she approached. "Stay back," he snarled. "Or what? You will shoot me?" Elena kept walking. "You have been trying to kill me for years. What is one more bullet? I am warning you. You killed my father." She was close now, close enough to see the fear in his eyes. "You sold me into servitude. You murdered your wife and blamed me for running." She stopped 5 feet away. "You stole 19 years of my life." Silas's hand shook. "I can give you money, power, whatever you want. I want justice. Then take it to the courts. Take it to the newspapers. I will be destroyed either way." Elena shook her head. "The courts let men like you win. The newspapers can be bought. But a bullet?" She raised her rifle. "A bullet cannot be bribed." Silas fired. The derringer's shot went wide, the tiny gun jerking in his trembling hand. Elena did not miss. Caleb found her standing over the body. Her rifle was still smoking, her hands were steady, and her face, when she turned to look at him, held something he had never seen there before. "Peace." "It is over," she said. "It is over," he agreed. Behind them, the last of Silas's men were surrendering or fleeing. Victor Crane limped down from his perch, bleeding from a dozen wounds but still standing. Pete was being helped by Thomas, both of them wounded, but alive. They had won. Against impossible odds, against a small army, against 19 years of running, they had won. Caleb took Elena in his arms and held her, while the Kansas sun burned bright overhead. "It is over," he said again. And this time he believed it. The days that followed the battle moved in a strange blur of exhaustion and disbelief. Sheriff Garrett arrived with a posse the morning after, summoned by a rider Pete had sent before the fighting began. They found the canyon littered with bodies and the survivors too tired to do more than point toward the caves. The sheriff was a practical man. He took statements, cataloged the dead. And when he heard the full story, including the letters and records Elena had saved from the Brennan homestead, he sent a telegram to Chicago. The response came 3 days later. Silas Croft, it seemed, had been under investigation for years. Bribery, extortion, smuggling. The authorities had suspected everything but could prove nothing. Until now. Elena's evidence, combined with the testimony of captured survivors, was enough to unravel the entire organization. Men Silas had controlled through fear began talking. Records surfaced. Secrets emerged into the light. By week's end, half of Chicago's criminal establishment was in custody. Victor Crane left before the sheriff could take his statement. Caleb found him saddling his horse behind the barn, moving slow and careful around his bandaged wounds. Running? Moving on. Victor cinched his saddle and turned. My debt is paid. Silas is dead. What happens now is not my concern. Where will you go? Somewhere without ghosts. Victor smiled his cold smile. If such a place exists, you helped save us. Caleb extended his hand. I will not forget that. Victor looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he took it. Take care of her, Shadow. She deserves someone who will not let her down. I know. Victor mounted his horse and rode away without looking back. Caleb watched until he disappeared over the horizon. Thomas Brennan surprised everyone. In the aftermath of the battle, something in him had shifted. The constant craving for drink remained. Caleb could see it in his shaking hands and desperate eyes. But he fought it with a determination that had been absent for years. He worked the Dawson Ranch alongside Pete, mending fences and hauling water. He read to his daughters at night, stumbling over words he had forgotten how to say. He looked at Elena with a gratitude that bordered on worship. Thank you, he told her one evening, for giving me a chance I did not deserve. Everyone deserves a chance, Thomas. No. He shook his head. I sold you. I would have let them kill you. I was a monster. You were a man who lost his way. Elena took his hand. The monster would not have fought beside us when it mattered. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. I want to be better. For Ruth, for Sarah, for you. Then be better. One day at a time. The Brennan homestead was beyond saving. Caleb rode out to assess the damage and found nothing but ashes and memory. Silas's men had burned it during the battle, either out of spite or as a distraction. Everything Thomas had built with his first wife, everything his daughters had known as home, was gone. Ruth took the news with grim acceptance. It was not really home anyway, not since Mama died. Sarah cried, but only for a moment. Can we stay with you? She asked Caleb. At your ranch? For as long as you want, he told her. Forever? Caleb looked at Elena, who stood in the doorway with the ghost of a smile on her lips. Maybe, he said. We will see. Pete Morgan healed slowly. The bullet had done more damage than he had let on during the battle, and the doctor from town had serious concerns about infection. For 3 days, they watched him sweat through fever dreams, and Caleb sat by his bedside more than once, talking to the unconscious man about nothing and everything. You cannot die, you old fool. Who else is going to keep me honest? Pete had laughed weakly when he finally woke. Takes more than one bullet to kill a Morgan. We are stubborn that way. How do you feel? Like I have been shot, trampled, and left out in the sun too long. Pete struggled to sit up. But I will live, assuming you do not make me listen to any more of your terrible stories. Caleb grinned. Some things never changed. Elena found the photograph in her pocket the night before the funeral. She had forgotten about it. In the chaos of battle and aftermath, the picture of Victor Crane with Silas's inscription on the back had slipped her mind. Now she held it up to the lamplight and studied the scarred face of the man who had killed her father. The man who had become their unlikely ally. The man who had helped end the nightmare that began 19 years ago. She should hate him. Part of her still did. But another part understood something about Victor Crane that she suspected he did not fully understand himself. He had been as much a victim as she was, trapped in Silas's web, waiting for the moment to break free. They had all been waiting, and now, finally, they were free. The funeral was small and quiet. Dusty Creek did not have a proper cemetery, just a plot of ground behind the church where the faithful were laid to rest. But the townspeople turned out anyway, farmers and shopkeepers and the women from the general store, standing in the Kansas sun to pay respects to men most of them had never known. They were not mourning Silas Croft or his hired killers. They were mourning the violence itself. The reminder that the frontier was still wild, still dangerous, still capable of erupting in blood and fire without warning. Sheriff Garrett spoke a few words. The preacher read from scripture. And then it was over, and the crowd dispersed, and life went on as it always did. Caleb found Elena at his mother's grave that afternoon. He had not told her about it, had not even visited it himself in months. But somehow she had found the small marker on the hill behind his cabin, the stone he had carved himself the winter after she passed. Margaret Dawson, beloved mother. Gone but not forgotten. She was the reason you came to Kansas. Caleb stood beside her. She got sick the winter before I gave up bounty hunting. Consumption. I brought her out here thinking the dry air might help. He paused. It did not. I am sorry. She never knew what I did for a living, what I had become. He looked at the stone. I think she suspected, but she never asked. Maybe she did not want to know. Mothers have a way of seeing what they need to see. She would have liked you. Caleb's voice was soft. She always said I was too hard on myself, too quick to carry guilt I had not earned. Elena took his hand. Maybe she was right. Maybe. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. That night, Caleb asked Elena to marry him. It was not romantic. There were no flowers, no ring, no bended knee. Just the two of them on the porch of his cabin, watching the stars come out one by one. I know we've only had a few weeks, he said, and I know everything has been chaos and danger and fear. But I have waited 19 years to ask you this question, and I am tired of waiting. Elena turned to look at him. What question? Will you marry me? Not because you need protection, not because the girls need a home, because I love you. Because I have loved you since I was 18 years old. Because I want to spend whatever time we have left making up for all the years we lost. Elena was quiet for a long moment. That is a terrible proposal, she finally said. I know. You are covered in dirt and you have not shaved in 3 days, and we are sitting on a porch that needs repainting. I know. Yes. Caleb blinked. Yes? Yes, I will marry you. She was smiling now, tears streaming down her face. Yes, yes, yes. He kissed her under the Kansas stars, and for the first time in 19 years, Caleb Dawson felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Ruth and Sarah heard the news the next morning. Sarah immediately began planning the wedding, which in her mind involved flowers and cake and a dress made entirely of ribbons. Ruth was more practical. Does this mean we are staying? If you want to, Caleb said, this can be your home for as long as you need it. And Thomas? He is still our father. He can stay too, if he keeps working on being better. Ruth considered this. He has been sober for 12 days, she said finally. That is the longest since Mama died. Then maybe there is hope for him yet. Ruth looked at Caleb with eyes too old for her years. There is hope for everyone, she said, even people who do not deserve it. Caleb thought about Victor Crane riding toward some distant horizon. Maybe you are right. Summer turned to autumn, and the Dawson Ranch transformed. What had been a lonely outpost became something warmer. Smoke rose from the chimney each morning. Laughter echoed from the yard where Ruth and Sarah played. The smell of Elena's cooking drifted through open windows, and Caleb found himself smiling at nothing, at everything, at the simple miracle of coming home to people who were waiting for him. They added a room to the cabin, then another. Pete supervised the construction with his arm still in a sling, barking orders at anyone who would listen and a few who tried not to. You call that a corner? That angle is crooked enough to make a blind man weep. Thomas hammered the nail straighter without complaint. Better? Passable. Barely. But Pete was grinning as he said it. Elena learned the rhythms of ranch life with surprising speed. She had always been resourceful. Years of servitude had taught her to work hard and complain little. But this was different. This was work that meant something, work that built rather than merely maintained. She planted a garden behind the cabin, coaxing vegetables from the Kansas soil through sheer force of will. She mended clothes and cooked meals and learned to ride properly, not the desperate survival riding she had done during the battle, but the easy partnership between horse and rider that came with patience and practice. "The mare likes you," Caleb told her one evening. "She likes that I bring her apples, that too." They rode together when chores allowed, exploring the land that was becoming theirs, the rocky hills where they had made their stand, the creek that wound through the valley, the old oak tree where Caleb had buried his mother. "This is beautiful country," Elena said. "Harsh, but beautiful, like everything worth having." She reached across the space between their horses and took his hand. "Like us." Thomas Brennan marked 60 days of sobriety on a Tuesday in October. No one made a fuss about it, no celebration, no speeches. But Ruth baked a cake and Sarah drew a picture of their family, which now included Caleb, Elena, Pete, and all the ranch horses. And Thomas looked at both offerings like they were made of gold. "I do not deserve this," he said quietly. "Maybe not," Ruth replied. "But we want you to have it anyway." Thomas cried then, great heaving sobs that shook his whole body. Ruth and Sarah held him, these daughters who had every reason to give up on their father and chose instead to give him another chance. Elena watched from the doorway, Caleb beside her. "Do you think he will make it?" she asked. "I do not know, but he is trying. That has to count for something." "It does." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. "It counts for everything." The wedding was held on the first day of November. The whole town came out for it. Farmers and shopkeepers and Sheriff Garrett with his new deputy. Even old Morrison from the bank, who had learned to keep his mouth shut about things that were none of his business. The preacher stood beneath the oak tree where Margaret Dawson was buried. Elena had insisted on it. She should be part of this, Elena had said. She raised you to be the man you are. She deserves to see you happy. Caleb had not trusted himself to speak. He had simply nodded and turned away before she could see the tears in his eyes. Elena wore a simple dress, white cotton with blue ribbons that Sarah had picked out. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, threaded with wildflowers Ruth had gathered that morning. She was the most beautiful thing Caleb had ever seen. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began. But Caleb was not listening. He was looking at Elena, at the face he had loved since he was barely a man, at the woman who had survived 19 years of suffering and emerged still capable of hope. She was looking back at him with eyes that said everything. Finally, after everything, finally. The vows were simple. "I, Caleb Dawson, take you, Elena Vasquez, to be my wife, to have and to hold for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. I, Elena Vasquez, take you, Caleb Dawson, to be my husband, to have and to hold, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." The preacher smiled. "By the power vested in me by the great state of Kansas, I now pronounce you husband and wife." He paused. "You may kiss the bride." Caleb pulled Elena close and kissed her, while the crowd cheered and Ruth rolled her eyes and Sarah bounced up and down with unbridled joy. When they finally broke apart, Elena was laughing. 19 years, she said. Was it worth the wait? Caleb looked at her, at his wife, at the life they were building together from the ashes of everything they had lost. "Every single day," he said, and meant it. The celebration lasted until sunset. There was food and music and dancing in the yard. Pete told stories about the old days until his voice gave out. Thomas stayed sober and even smiled a few times. Sheriff Garrett got tipsy on cider and had to be helped home by his deputy. As the last guests departed, Caleb and Elena stood on the porch of their cabin, his cabin, their cabin now, and watched the stars come out. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I never believed this was possible." Caleb's arm tightened around her shoulders. A home, a family, someone to share it with. "And now I believe in miracles." Elena laughed softly. "I was thinking about the depot," she said. "The moment I stepped off that train and saw you standing there, you looked terrified. I was, but not of you." She turned to face him. "I was terrified that seeing you again would make me hope, and hope had hurt me so many times before. And now I understand. Hope is not the enemy. Giving up is." She kissed him gently. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "Never," he promised. "Not in this life, or any other." Winter came hard that year. Snow fell thick and fast, blanketing the ranch in white silence. The cattle huddled together for warmth. The horses stamped and snorted in their stalls. And the cabin, expanded and reinforced, held firm against the howling wind. Inside, life continued. Ruth practiced her letters by lamplight, determined to become the first woman in Kansas to attend university. Sarah learned to knit, producing scarves of increasingly questionable quality that everyone wore anyway. Thomas worked alongside Pete, learning the business of ranching from a man who had forgotten more about cattle than most people ever knew. And Caleb and Elena? They built a life. Not the life either of them had imagined. Not the easy path of young love followed naturally to its conclusion. This was something harder, something forged in loss and suffering and the stubborn refusal to let go. It was better. On Christmas Eve, they gathered around the fire, all of them, this strange family that had come together through circumstance and choice. Pete told the story of his first cattle drive, embellishing freely until the steers were the size of elephants, and the river they crossed might as well have been the Mississippi. Thomas taught the girls a song his mother used to sing, his voice rough but true. Elena read aloud from a book of poetry she had found in town, words about love and loss and the resilience of the human heart. And Caleb sat in his chair by the fire, watching these people he had somehow gathered around him, and felt something he had not felt in years. Whole. "You are smiling," Elena said later when the others had gone to bed. "Am I?" "You are. It looks good on you." He pulled her close. "I was thinking about the first time I saw you, in Tennessee. You were standing in the creek with your skirts hiked up, trying to catch a fish with your bare hands. I was 12. You were magnificent even then. I just did not know it yet." Elena laughed. "What else do you remember?" "Everything. The way you tilted your head when you were thinking, the sound of your laugh, the taste of your lips when you kissed me. That was a long time ago. Some things do not fade." She was quiet for a moment. "I remember being afraid," she said finally. "All the time. After my father died, after they sent me to Chicago, I was afraid every single day. Afraid of Silas, afraid of being caught, afraid of hoping for something better. And now? Now I am not afraid anymore." She looked up at him. "You did that," she said. "You and this place and this family we are building. You made me believe I could stop running." Caleb kissed her forehead. "You never have to run again," he promised. "Not from anything. Not ever." And in that moment, watching the firelight dance across the walls of their home, listening to the wind howl harmlessly outside, Caleb knew that every hardship, every loss, every dark road he had traveled, had been leading him here, to this woman, to this life, to home. Spring arrived like a promise finally kept. The snow melted, the creek swelled, the land turned green, then gold, then burst into wildflowers that stretched as far as the eye could see. Caleb stood on the porch one morning and breathed deep, filling his lungs with air that smelled of earth and growth and new beginnings. Elena found him there, a cup of coffee in each hand. "Penny, for your thoughts?" He took the offered cup, thinking about the future. Oh? Elena leaned against the rail beside him. And what does the future look like? Bigger, more cattle, maybe some horses. He gestured toward the hills. There is good grazing land north of here. Morrison says it might come up for sale next year. You have been talking to Morrison? He has learned to be more careful about what he says. Caleb smiled. Besides, we will need the space. For what? He turned to look at her. For the family I hope we are building. Elena's eyes widened. Caleb. He set down his coffee and took her hands. I know it is soon. I know we are still figuring out what this life looks like. But I want children with you, Elena. Sons and daughters who will grow up on this land, who will never know what it feels like to be hunted or afraid. Caleb, if you are not ready, I understand. If you need more time. Caleb. What? She was smiling. I was going to tell you tonight, at dinner, with everyone there, but since you brought it up, tell me what? I am already carrying your child. The news spread through the household like wildfire. Ruth immediately began planning where the baby would sleep, mentally rearranging furniture and calculating how many blankets they would need. Sarah declared that she hoped it would be a girl because girls were better at keeping secrets. Pete pretended to be grumpy about the extra noise but could not hide the moisture in his eyes. And Thomas, 60 days sober now, stretched to 100 and climbing, shook Caleb's hand with a grip that trembled only slightly. Congratulations, he said. You deserve this, both of you. Thank you, Thomas. I mean it. After everything you did for us, everything you risked, this is exactly what should happen. Thomas paused. It gives me hope. For what? That good people can still have good endings. Summer brought growth of every kind. The ranch expanded. New fences went up. More cattle arrived. Pete trained 2 young hands from town, teaching them the skills that would keep the operation running for years to come. Elena grew round and radiant. She moved more slowly now, but her spirit remained fierce. She still insisted on helping with meals, still read to the girls every night, still found ways to contribute even when everyone told her to rest. I am pregnant, she said, not invalid. Caleb learned quickly not to argue. The baby came in September. It was a long labor, difficult at times, and Caleb spent hours pacing outside the cabin, wearing a groove in the dirt, while the midwife from town worked her ancient magic. Pete tried to distract him with conversation. Did I ever tell you about the time I delivered a calf in a blizzard? Yes. What about the stampede of '83? Twice. The story about the widow Morrison? Pete. Fine. I will be quiet. But he stayed, solid and reliable, a reminder that Caleb was not alone. The cry came at sunset, thin and high and miraculous, splitting the evening silence like a church bell. Caleb burst through the door to find Elena exhausted but smiling, a small bundle cradled in her arms. Come meet your son, she whispered. Caleb crossed to the bed on legs that felt like water. He looked down at the tiny face, the closed eyes, the perfect miniature fingers. He has your nose, Elena said. Poor kid. Stop that. She reached up and touched his cheek. He is beautiful. He is. Caleb could barely speak. He is perfect. What should we name him? Caleb thought about his mother, buried under the oak tree. About Elena's father, murdered for seeing too much. About all the people they had lost along the way. James, he said finally, after my father, and Mateo, after yours. James Mateo Dawson. Elena tested the name on her tongue. It is perfect, she said. Life settled into new patterns. James learned to crawl, then walk, then run, toddling after Ruth and Sarah, who treated him like a precious toy to be protected and adored. The ranch prospered. Caleb's herd grew. His reputation spread as a fair dealer and hard worker, the kind of man other ranchers respected even if they did not fully understand him. Elena ran the household with quiet efficiency, but she also found time for her garden, her poetry, her long rides across the land she had learned to love. Thomas stayed sober, day after day, month after month, year after year. He never forgot what he had done. The guilt lived in his eyes whenever he looked at Elena, but he channeled it into something productive. He became a father again, truly present for his daughters in ways he had not been since their mother died. Pete Morgan grew older, but no less sharp. He told his stories to James now, the same exaggerated tales of cattle drives and river crossings, and the boy listened with wide eyes and endless wonder. Sheriff Garrett retired, replaced by a younger man with modern ideas about law enforcement. But he still visited the ranch sometimes, sharing news from town and reminiscing about the battle in the canyon that had become local legend. On James's first birthday, Caleb walked to the oak tree on the hill. He had not visited his mother's grave in months. Life had become too full, too busy, too blessed for him to dwell on loss. But today he needed to talk to her. "You would love him, Ma." Caleb knelt beside the stone. "He has your laugh. That big, ridiculous laugh that used to make Pa say you sounded like a startled hen." He smiled at the memory. "Elena is everything you hoped I would find. Strong and kind and fierce when she needs to be. She makes me better, makes me want to be better." The wind rustled through the oak leaves overhead. "I know I was not the son you deserved. All those years of killing, all that darkness I carried. But I found my way out. Found something worth living for instead of dying for." He placed his hand on the stone. "Thank you for believing I could." Elena found him there an hour later. "Talking to your mother? Telling her about James?" Elena sat beside him in the grass. "Do you think she can hear you?" "I do not know, but it feels right to try." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "I have been thinking," Elena said finally, "about the depot. About that first day when I stepped off the train and saw you standing there. What about it? I was so afraid. Afraid of Silas, afraid of the hunters, afraid of what seeing you again might mean. And now I understand." Elena took his hand. "All those years of running, all that suffering, it was leading me somewhere, to this place, to this family, to you. You believe that?" "I do." She looked at him with eyes that held no more shadows. "Some loves are not meant to come easy. They have to be fought for, earned, tested by fire until only the truth remains. And what truth is that? That I was always meant to find you again." Elena smiled. "It just took 19 years for the universe to remember." Caleb pulled her close. "Worth the wait?" Every single day, 5 years passed like pages turning. James grew from a toddler into a boy with his mother's dark eyes and his father's stubborn jaw. He learned to ride before he could read properly, sitting in front of Caleb on the old mare that Elena had claimed as her own. Ruth turned 17 and announced her intention to become a teacher. She had been studying by correspondence for 2 years, books arriving by mail from a college back east, and she devoured them with the same fierce determination she had shown since childhood. Sarah, at 14, had become the ranch's unofficial veterinarian. Animals trusted her in a way they trusted no one else, and she spent her days caring for the horses, the cattle, even the barn cats that multiplied faster than anyone could count. Thomas Brennan marked 5 years of sobriety with a small celebration at the ranch. He was a different man now, quieter, sadder, but infinitely kinder. He had found work in town as a carpenter, and his daughters visited him every Sunday for dinner. "I will never forgive myself," he told Caleb once, "for what I did to Elena, for the years I wasted drowning in whiskey. You are not the same man you were. No, but that man still lives inside me. I hear him sometimes, telling me one drink would not hurt, that I deserve to forget. And what do you tell him?" Thomas smiled. "I tell him my daughters need me sober, and that Elena gave me a second chance I did not deserve. I will not waste it. Pete Morgan died in the spring of the 6th year. He went peacefully in his sleep the way he had always said he wanted to go. None of that lingering nonsense, he used to say. When my time comes, I want to close my eyes and wake up somewhere with better whiskey and fewer chores. They buried him on the hill beside Margaret Dawson, under the shade of the old oak tree. Caleb spoke at the graveside. Pete Morgan was the stubbornest, most irritating, most loyal man I ever knew. He stayed when anyone with sense would have run. He fought when fighting seemed hopeless. He believed in me when I had given up on myself. His voice cracked. I do not know what comes next. Maybe he is right, and there is a place with better whiskey. Or maybe there is just silence and peace. Either way, he earned it. He earned every single minute of rest. Elena held his hand through the service. James stood solemn and confused, too young to fully understand death, but old enough to know that something important had been lost. That night, Caleb sat on the porch alone, watching the stars, and let himself cry for the first time in years. Life continued. It always did. New hands were hired. The ranch expanded further. James started school in town, reluctantly at first, then with growing enthusiasm as he discovered a talent for mathematics. Ruth left for her teaching position in Wichita, promising to write every week. Sarah fell in love with the blacksmith's son, a quiet young man who looked at her like she hung the moon. And Caleb and Elena? They grew older together. Gray spread through Caleb's hair and beard. Lines deepened around Elena's eyes. But their love remained constant, a bedrock beneath everything else. Some nights they still sat on the porch, watching the stars, talking about nothing and everything. "Do you ever wonder?" Elena asked once. "What would have happened if you had knocked on that door in Chicago?" "Sometimes." "What do you imagine?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "I imagine you would have told me to come in, that we would have started over right then, 10 years sooner than we did. That sounds nice, but then we would not have had these 10 years. These exact 10 years, with James and the girls and Pete and everything we built." Elena nodded slowly. "I think I needed those extra years," she said. "Needed to learn who I was without anyone to lean on. Needed to prove to myself that I could survive. And now? Now I know I can." She squeezed his hand. "But I'm glad I do not have to anymore." On their 15th wedding anniversary, Caleb took Elena back to the spot where he had first proposed. The oak tree had grown taller. Margaret's grave was joined now by Pete's, the two stones standing peaceful in the Kansas grass. 15 years, Elena said. It does not feel real. No, it feels like a dream. A good dream, the best kind. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "I want you to know something," Caleb said. "Something I should have said a long time ago." "What?" He turned to face her. "That first day at the depot. When you stepped off the train and I saw you again after 19 years, I froze because I could not believe you were real. I thought I must be dreaming, or that God was playing some cruel joke, showing me everything I wanted just to take it away. I remember, but I also knew in that moment that I would fight for you, no matter what it took. No matter how many men came after you, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. Caleb, I would have done anything," he said, "and I would do it again, 1,000 times over." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I know," she whispered. "I have always known." She kissed him, soft and sweet, and Caleb felt the same spark he had felt by that Tennessee creek 40 years ago. Some loves, he thought, never fade. They just burn brighter with time. 20 years. 2 decades since Elena stepped off that train and turned Caleb's world inside out. 2 decades of building, growing, loving, losing, and finding their way back to each other again and again. The Dawson Ranch had become a landmark in the territory, the biggest spread for 100 miles. a legacy that would outlast them both. James was a man now, 20 years old with his mother's dark eyes and his father's capable hands. He had taken over most of the day-to-day operations, allowing Caleb to step back and enjoy the fruits of his labor. Ruth taught school in Wichita and visited every summer with her husband and 3 children, filling the house with noise and laughter. Sarah had married her blacksmith, and together they ran the forge in town, producing the finest horseshoes and tools in 3 counties. Thomas Brennan had died 2 years back peacefully in his daughter's arms. He had stayed sober until the end. And Elena? Elena stood beside Caleb on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the Kansas sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, "thinking about how far we have come. It has been quite a journey." Caleb nodded. "You know, I used to be afraid that all of this would disappear, that I would wake up one day and find myself alone again. And now I know better." Caleb took her hand. "Now I know that whatever comes next, we face it together." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. "I love you, Caleb Dawson. I love you too. More than I ever thought possible." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. That night they gathered the family for dinner, James and his wife expecting their first child, Ruth and her brood, rowdy and joyful, Sarah and her husband, quiet and content. All of them around one table, sharing food and stories and the simple miracle of being together. Caleb looked at Elena across the table and saw the girl he had kissed by the Tennessee Creek all those years ago. Older now, weathered by time and hardship, but still beautiful, still fierce, still his. She caught him staring and smiled. "What?" "Nothing." He shook his head. "Just grateful." "For what?" "For all of this. For you. For the life we built from nothing." Elena reached across the table and took his hand. "It was not nothing," she said. "We had each other. We had hope. And that was enough." Later, when the children had gone to bed and the grandchildren were finally asleep, Caleb and Elena walked to the oak tree on the hill. The graves of Margaret Dawson and Pete Morgan stood silent in the moonlight. "Do you think they are proud of us?" Elena asked. "I hope so." Caleb looked at the stones. "I like to think Ma is up there somewhere, watching over us, making sure we do not mess things up too badly. And Pete? Pete is probably complaining about the quality of the heavenly whiskey." Caleb smiled. "Some things never change." Elena laughed softly. "I want to be buried here," she said, "when my time comes, beside them." "I know. Me too." They stood together in the darkness, shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart. "We did it," Elena said. "Against all odds, despite everything that tried to tear us apart, we made a life together. We did. And it was beautiful. The most beautiful thing I have ever known. 20 years of building home. 20 years of raising children, burying friends, weathering storms, and watching the sun rise over Kansas plains. 20 years of loving the same woman he had loved since he was barely a man. Caleb Dawson looked at his life and found no regret. Only gratitude. Only peace. Only the bone-deep certainty that everything, the pain, the loss, the years of wandering, had been leading him here, to this land, to this family, to her. Some loves arrive on time, gentle as spring wind. Others must cross fire and blood, loss and years, to find their way home. Both are worth the journey. Caleb Dawson had frozen at that depot 20 years ago, had watched the woman he loved step into his life again after 19 years of silence, had fought for her, bled for her, built a life with her brick by brick and day by day. And now, standing under the Kansas stars with Elena's hand in his, surrounded by the legacy they had created together, he understood the truth he had been searching for his whole life. Love is not a destination. It is a journey. And the best journeys never really end. The sun rose over the Dawson Ranch, golden light spilling across fields and fences and the old oak tree on the hill. In the cabin, a baby cried, James's firstborn, the next generation of Dawsons, announcing his presence to the world. Elena stirred beside Caleb. Her hair spread silver across the pillow. "Another dawn," she murmured. "Another blessing." She smiled without opening her eyes. "Go see your grandson, Caleb Dawson. He is waiting for you." Caleb rose from the bed, feeling every one of his 57 years in his bones, but also feeling something else: joy, contentment, home. He walked to the window and looked out at the land he had built from nothing. The ranch spread before him, prosperous and peaceful. The hills rose in the distance, still wild, still beautiful. And somewhere beyond them, the creek where it all began still flowed toward the sea. Caleb smiled. Some loves are worth waiting for, some journeys are worth taking. And some stories, the best stories, do not end. They simply become part of something larger. A legacy, a family, a home. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.